Night falls over suburban Miami, 1999. The orange glow of streetlights hums against the stillness of a quiet neighborhood until it's shattered by the wail of sirens. FBI agents move in tight formation down a narrow driveway, their boots thudding in rhythm. "Go, go, go," shouts the lead agent, flashlight cutting through the darkness. A door bursts open. A woman screams. Somewhere in the house, a boy, barely 15, freezes at the sound. On his computer screen, a digital window glows like a portal into another world. NASA servers, lines of code, and in the corner of that screen, an active connection flickers. He's still inside. The cursor blinks like a heartbeat. He knows what this means. It's over. But for a fleeting second, he can't look away from the window, from the impossible thing he just did. A kid in his bedroom, who had reached across cyberspace and touched the soul of America's most sacred institution. The agents swarm in, hands yank him from the chair. The computer is ripped from the wall, the hum dies, and for the first time in months, the connection goes silent. The headlines would later call him the boy who hacked NASA. But what drove a 15-year-old to break into one of the most secure networks on Earth? Was it arrogance, curiosity, or something darker? A need to prove that the digital gods could still bleed? This is the story of Jonathan James, known online as Zerum Raid, the teenager who made the United States government stop and stare into the abyss of its own security. Jonathan James was born in 1983 in South Florida, a child of the early internet age. While other kids rode bikes or swapped baseball cards, Jonathan built his world out of circuits and code. By 12, he was pulling apart computers just to see what made them tick. By 13, he was writing his own programs. The screen wasn't just a tool for him. It was an escape, a place where rules dissolve, and a single keystroke could make him powerful. But this was the late 90s, the dawn of the digital frontier. The internet was still wild, undefined, and intoxicating. Chat rooms buzzed with anonymity. Hackers traded exploits like baseball cards, and teenagers began to realize something terrifying. The world's most powerful systems were connected and very, very fragile. Jonathan found a home in that chaos. He wasn't malicious, not yet. To him, hacking wasn't about destruction. It was about discovery. He wanted to see, to understand how far he could go before someone noticed. He taught himself how to slip past firewalls, how to exploit trust relationships between networks, how to use backdoors and sniffers, tools that would later make him infamous. Online, he would see Zerum Raid, a name whispered in underground chat rooms. He wasn't seeking fame. He was seeking belonging. But curiosity has a way of turning into obsession. And in 1999, that obsession found its target. NASA servers held something that captured his imagination. Source code used to control vital functions of the International Space Station's life support systems. To most, it was just data. To Jonathan, it was proof of the extraordinary, the chance to touch the untouchable. He began scanning networks, probing vulnerabilities. The entry point came not through NASA itself, but through the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, a branch of the U.S. Department of Defense. Using a backdoor in their system, he slipped through undetected. He was no longer a kid playing with computers. He was now inside the digital bloodstream of the U.S. government. And he didn't just peek, he took something, 13 million lines of source code controlling the International Space Station's environmental systems. With it, NASA could simulate oxygen levels, temperature control, and critical life support mechanics. To Jonathan, it was a crown jewel. To NASA, it was a national security nightmare. When the agency detected the breach, they shut down their systems for 21 days at a cost of over $40,000. To the public, it was chaos. To the FBI, it was war. But to Jonathan James, sitting in his small Florida bedroom, it was victory. He had done the impossible. He had outsmarted the most advanced network on Earth. And for a moment, he felt unstoppable. He didn't know it yet, but every keystroke had already sealed his fate. The digital trail was invisible to him, but glaringly obvious to the agents closing in. The walls began to close, and long before Jonathan heard the sirens. At first, NASA security teams thought the intrusion was a technical glitch. an anomaly buried somewhere in their code. But when engineers discovered missing files tied to the International Space Station's environmental control software, the tone shifted instantly. Inside NASA's command center, tension hung like static in the air. This wasn't just data theft. It was life support software, algorithms that regulated oxygen and temperature for astronauts orbiting Earth. If altered even slightly, it could have catastrophic consequences. The FBI's Cybercrime Division was notified within hours. They called it a matter of national security. Logs trace the intrusion to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA, a Pentagon branch focused on nuclear, biological, and chemical threats. If someone had penetrated that network, the implications were terrifying. So, a team of digital forensics experts began the chase. They followed footprints most hackers thought invisible, fragment of packet routes, log files, timestamps, and a peculiar signature embedded in one of the scripts. See Zero Raid. The name appeared like graffiti in the heart of a fortress. Jonathan didn't know it yet, but as every move was being reconstructed, every login, every keystroke, every IP relay he used through proxies or public servers was meticulously unraveled. The FBI had something he didn't: time and patience. They quietly monitored him for months, mapping his online behavior. They didn't want to just catch him. They wanted to understand how a teenager had outmaneuvered the world's top agencies. Meanwhile, Jonathan kept experimenting. He had broken into Bell South and Miami-Dade County schools, testing vulnerabilities, almost as if daring someone to stop him. He wasn't stealing money. He wasn't causing destruction. It was about control, about curiosity curdling into compulsion. At night, he'd stare at the blue glow of his CRT monitor, code spilling across the screen like neon hieroglyphs. He once told a friend online, "I do it because I can." But the moment NASA realized the magnitude of the breach, the game changed. The FBI obtained a warrant. Surveillance vans began appearing near his neighborhood. Agents recorded power usage spikes from his home that coincided with intrusion attempts. It was only a matter of time. On a humid morning in September 1999, they moved. FBI agents surrounded his house before sunrise. Neighbors peeked through blinds as black vans lined the street. Jonathan was still in his room, headphones on, immersed in a world far larger than his own. When they stormed in, the sound of boots and shouts echoed through the hall. He didn't resist. He barely spoke. He looked dazed, like someone waking from a dream that had lasted too long. Agents bagged every floppy disk, hard drive, and notebook in sight. In total, they found thousands of pages of logs, scripts, and intrusion notes, meticulous records of his exploits. As they let him out, a neighbor recalled how small he looked, swallowed by the oversized jacket of an FBI agent. Walking beside him, he wasn't a monster or a cyber terrorist. He was just a kid, pale, quiet, and lost. But in the eyes of the law, he had breached the sanctum of America's digital defense. And now, the boy called C-Zero Raid was about to face the full weight of the United States government. The interrogation room was cold, that kind of clinical chill meant to make people talk. A single bulb hummed overhead. The FBI agent sat across from him, folders stacked high, every page filled with evidence. Jonathan James, 15 years old, stared at the table, fingers clenched, his reflection trembling in the metal surface. They didn't need to raise their voices. The data spoke for itself. Digital fingerprints, logs, file paths, chat transcripts. Every command traced back to his IP. Every intrusion documented like a breadcrumb trail through cyberspace. He had been caught red-handed in the most digital sense of the phrase. But what baffled them most was why. They expected a criminal mastermind, a foreign agent, maybe a hacker for hire. Instead, they found a quiet teenager with a soft voice and a restless curiosity. Jonathan didn't steal for money. He didn't sell secrets. When asked why he hacked NASA, he shrugged and said, "I was just curious. I wanted to see how things worked." To the agents, that answer was almost more terrifying, because it meant there was no motive to track, no greed, no politics, just an insatiable hunger to explore, a mind that viewed firewalls as puzzles and security systems as invitations. In court, the U.S. government wanted to make an example out of him. At the time, cybercrime laws were still new, and agencies were desperate to prove they could enforce them. The media dubbed him the boy who hacked NASA. Headlines painted him as a prodigy turned threat, a child who had humiliated one of the most powerful institutions on Earth. The prosecution spoke of national security risks, of the $40,000 shutdown NASA had to perform. They described his intrusion as a dangerous breach that could have endangered astronauts' lives. Jonathan's defense lawyer countered, "He's a kid. A smart one, yes, but a kid who made a mistake. He didn't harm anyone. He just peeked." But the system didn't see curiosity. It saw precedent, and precedent demanded punishment. In 2000, Jonathan James became the first juvenile in U.S. history to be convicted for a federal cybercrime. He was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest, probation until his 18th birthday, and mandatory community service. He was forbidden from touching a computer for years. To a boy who had lived half his life through screens, that was the cruelest punishment imaginable. NASA called the case a wake-up call. The Pentagon increased funding for cybersecurity. And in the shadowy corners of the internet, the name C0 Raid became a legend. Other hackers whispered his story with reverence. A kid who had taken on the giants and walked away alive. To them, he wasn't a criminal. He was a pioneer. A symbol of how fragile power could be in the digital age. For a while, Jonathan tried to move on. He worked small jobs, stayed quiet, kept his head down. But something in him had shifted. He glimpsed the machinery of government from both sides. First as an intruder, then as a target. And he understood something most never would. In cyberspace, no wall is unbreakable, no authority untouchable. But fame, even the underground kind, comes with shadows. The story of C0 Raid wasn't over. In a few short years, Jonathan James would find himself once again under the watchful eyes of the FBI. This time, for something much darker, and it would push him to a breaking point from which there was no return. The years after his sentence passed quietly, at least on the surface. Jonathan stayed in Florida, kept a low profile, and tried to rebuild his life without the digital world that had once defined him. But for a mind built on code, silence can be unbearable. He once described computers as a world where everything makes sense. Without that world, his own started to come apart. Then, in 2007, everything changed again. A new federal investigation erupted. A major identity theft ring that had stolen the personal data of over 45 million customers from TJX Companies, the parent firm behind TJ Maxx and Marshalls. It was one of the largest retail data breaches in U.S. history, and it sent shockwaves through law enforcement. The FBI believed the ring was tied to several well-known hackers. One name surfaced again and again, Jonathan James. There was no direct proof he was involved, but his reputation made him a suspect. To the FBI, he was a symbol of what was possible. A kid who once walked through NASA's walls. Surely he could do this too. In 2008, agents raided his home once again. He wasn't arrested. They were looking for evidence. They found nothing, but the damage was done. To Jonathan, it was deja vu. The feeling of being hunted again, the fear that no matter what he did, he'd never escape his past. He later wrote in a letter to friends, "I honestly don't know what to say. The FBI thinks I'm involved in something I'm not. They're trying to set me up." The stress consumed him. Friends said he barely slept. He stopped going out. He felt watched. And the same system that once made him famous now made him feel trapped. On May 18th, 2008, Jonathan James was found dead in his shower from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was just 24 years old. Beside him was a letter, part anger, part exhaustion, part surrender. In it he wrote, "I have no faith in the justice system. Perhaps my death will send a stronger message than any of my actions ever could." He ended his note with something haunting, almost prophetic. "Remember me not as a hacker, but as someone who believed in possibilities." His death sent shockwaves through the hacking community. Many saw it as a tragedy. A young man crushed under the weight of a system that couldn't distinguish curiosity from crime. Others saw it as a cautionary tale. Proof that brilliance without balance could self-destruct. In the years that followed, journalists revisited his story. Documentaries explored his case. and his name became part of hacker mythology. Jonathan James, see Zero Raid. The boy who hacked NASA had become something larger than life. A reminder that behind every headline, every hack, every line of code, there's a human being searching for meaning in a system built on control. 2 decades later, NASA still remembers a breach. It forced a revolution in cybersecurity awareness. Every new generation of federal analysts is told about the James incident, not as a failure, but as a warning, because that story wasn't really about hacking. It was about vulnerability, human and digital alike. Jonathan's story lives on not in the chaos he caused, but in the questions he left behind. How much of our world is truly secure? How thin is the line between genius and danger? And what happens when the brightest minds are never given a place to belong?